Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're unpacking a massive, kind of hidden conflict that's playing out right now across Europe. On one hand, we're literally witnessing a complete reinvention of modern food culture, like a true culinary renaissance. But on the other hand, there are these deeply entrenched financial systems operating behind the scenes that are, well, completely out of step with this new reality. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack Europe's plant-based paradox, pulling back the curtain on the true and often totally hidden costs of the food on our plates. To set the stage, let me ask you a question. Where do you think is the absolute best place in the world to be a vegan in 2026? Well, you might actually be surprised to learn that Europe has quietly transformed into the ultimate destination for plant-based eaters. Whether you're a committed vegan who meticulously researches every single meal, or just a curious flexitarian looking to sneak a few more plants into your diet while you travel, the entire continent has shifted dramatically in your favor. It's really not just a passing trend anymore, you know? It's basically become part of the natural fabric of how Europeans eat. And this brilliantly illustrates that shift. The humble vegetable has totally gone haute cuisine, sparking this massive culinary revolution. And look, we're not just talking about a few niche restaurants here. This is a huge economic driver. The European plant-based food and beverage market is projecting an absolutely incredible 50% growth by the year 2030. To put that into perspective, we're talking about adding a potential 111 billion euros to the European economy every single year. That's enough to support hundreds of thousands of high-quality jobs. Let's take a quick rapid-fire tour of what this actually looks like on the ground, because the variety is just staggering. You have the Michelin-starred elegance of Alain Passard's Arpège in Paris, where he famously ditched meat to elevate vegetables to a Grand Cru, or Pietro Lehmann's legendary Gioia in Milan. But it's not all fine dining. Contrast that with the everyday accessibility of Berlin, where you can literally walk into an entirely vegan supermarket chain called Vegans. In London, you can grab a killer vegan sausage naan at Dishoom or graze through incredible plant-based stalls at Borough Market. Over in Amsterdam, you've got the indulgent comfort food of the meatless district, while Prague's La Calava proves that Central Europe isn't just about pork knuckles anymore. And down in Athens, traditional staples like fava bean puree and horta, which are wild greens, mean you're eating naturally plant-based food that has literally been perfected over centuries. I mean, it sounds like a complete food utopia, right? But what if the system is fundamentally rigged against this revolution? Hold that thought, because this incredible continent-wide culinary boom is happening despite a 168.7 billion euro public financial system that is actively working against it. Section 1. The Hidden Subsidy Imbalance. Let's dig into the hidden truth here. Now, what's really interesting about this data is how it exposes the mechanics of the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, or the CAP. This is one of the largest allocations of the entire EU budget, and it dictates exactly how European taxpayers' money gets distributed to farmers and food producers. Looking at the numbers from 2020, almost a quarter of the entire EU budget was spent propping up animal-sourced foods. Out of the CAP subsidies directed at food production, a massive 77%, that is 39 billion euros, goes straight to animal-sourced foods. Meanwhile, plant-based foods receive just 23%, or 11.6 billion euros. It creates a massive, heavily uneven playing field, all funded directly by taxpayer money. Breaking that down a bit further, using data from the FoodRise EU report, the disparities are pretty staggering. Beef and lamb production received 8 billion euros in CAP subsidies. Legumes, things like the lentils and beans that are foundational to a sustainable plant-based diet, received just 14 million. Yes, million with an M. That means beef and lamb received over 580 times more public funding than legumes. And the gap just keeps going. The dairy industry received an estimated 16 billion euros in subsidies. Nuts and seeds, just 29 million. So dairy receives an estimated 554 times more subsidies than climate-friendly nuts and seeds. To put a really fine point on it, even pork gets nearly 240 times more funding than legumes. And get this, lard and tallow alone receive more subsidies than all fruits and vegetables combined. Literally, let that sink in for a second. Section 2. The cost of the status quo. So why does this financial imbalance actually matter to the average citizen? Well, it really comes down to a concept called embodied greenhouse gas emissions. This simply means all the emissions generated throughout the entire life cycle of a product. We're talking from the farm, through processing and transport, all the way to your plate. According to the data, animal-sourced foods are responsible for between 81 and 86% of the embodied greenhouse gas emissions from all EU food production. When we actually put the inputs and outputs side by side, the inefficiency becomes glaringly obvious. Animal agriculture dominates emissions at up to 86%, and the high consumption of these foods cost the EU an estimated €452 billion in diet-related diseases in 2022 alone. Yet, despite taking up all these resources and subsidies, meat and dairy only supply about 32% of the calories and 64% of the protein consumed by EU citizens. From a pure public investment standpoint, funding this system so disproportionately is incredibly inefficient. Moving on to Section 3, Agribusiness versus Food Reform. If the system is this inefficient, why does it stay in place? Well, the FoodRise EU report tracked the flow of lobbying funds to find out. They reported that between 2014 and 2020, the meat and dairy industry spent an estimated €15 million lobbying the EU. According to their findings, agribusiness trade groups like Kappa Kojige successfully lobbied to maintain these industrial livestock subsidies. The source data also notes that their efforts successfully led to the removal of specific agricultural emissions targets from the EU's 2040 climate plan, and they even scrubbed recommendations for shifting toward plant-based diets from Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. But aside from lobbying, the actual mechanics of how subsidies are paid out actively discourages change. There's a mechanism called coupled income support, which directly ties payments to production volume. Basically, if a farmer reduces their livestock numbers to lower their emissions, they literally receive less money. And the European Court of Auditors points out that 70% of these specific payments go to ruminant livestock, like cattle. So, the current financial architecture is set up in a way that actively disincentivizes farmers from reducing emissions or transitioning their land to plant-based farming. Which brings us to Section 4, a blueprint for transition. So, the crucial point is that the narrative definitely doesn't end there. There is a massive consensus already building for a more sustainable future. Back in 2024, the Strategic Dialogue on the Future of EU Agriculture resulted in this landmark breakthrough. Farming groups, civil society organizations, academics, and businesses all came together and unanimously agreed that a shift toward balanced, healthier, and more sustainable diets is absolutely essential. The appetite for change, which you can literally see expanding on supermarket shelves filled with diverse plant-based options, is shared across the board. Connecting this back to your wallet, your health, and the very air you breathe, the scientific data is just overwhelmingly positive. The Lancet Commission designed what they call the Planetary Health Diet, which is essentially a flexible, plant-rich dietary template. And if high-income countries adopted this, the statistical benefits are astounding. We are talking about a 61% reduction in agricultural emissions, up to 39% fewer cancers in Europe, 40% lower nitrogen emissions, and, get this, over $5 trillion in global savings every single year. To actually get there, the report outlines 4 very specific, actionable policy recommendations that would help European farmers safely and profitably transition. Step 1. Introduce an EU plant-based action plan to promote these foods across the entire supply chain. Step 2. End the use of EU taxpayers' funds for marketing meat and dairy. Step 3. Create an agro-food just transition fund. This one is absolutely vital because it would financially support and train livestock farmers, ensuring they're protected and can profitably transition their businesses. And finally, Step 4. Rebalance those massive cap payments so they primarily support farmers growing food for direct human consumption rather than just animal feed. Let's move to the conclusion and see how this all builds together. The culinary revolution is already here, happening in local markets across Europe right now, and the science is incredibly clear on the benefits. So, we're left with one final urgent question to think about. If our diets are changing for the better, shouldn't our public funds do the same? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.